Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on a beautiful day. It's turned into a gorgeous day. This week, Jon Talton is with us, and Jon, as I think probably many of you know, writes for the Seattle Times. Next week, Tim Harris is here next week, and again, it will be the same format tonight, although we're in a little different situation. Jon's going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then he'll stop. We'll gather together in groups of 3 to 5. And then after about 20 minutes of that, we'll come back with Jon, and the groups can address the information that Jon has given us. Again, what this is all about is to have a place to have a civic discussion. And this 7-week series, and then we're going to break for the summer, but this 7-week series is really about the economy. It is about corporations and their impact on our life. And it's also an ongoing opportunity to hear a little bit about Initiative 103. And so after Jon talks, after that part wraps up, we'll close the night. Jeff will come up and share with you a little bit more information on I-103. So, thank you all for being here. Jon, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me tonight. I'm especially honored to be here with this group. I am mindful of the story about the man who died and went to heaven, and he was being taken on a guided tour by St. Peter, and he was going from room to room, and he looked in one room and there were a bunch of people eating meat on Friday, and he said, "Who are those?" And St. Peter said, "Well, those are the Catholics." Then there was another room, and people were eating pork hot dogs, and St. Peter said, "Those are the Jews." And then they came to another room, and people were just dancing up a storm, and St. Peter said, "And those are the Baptists." And then they came to finally another room, and people were just sitting around doing nothing. And the man was surprised, and he said, "Well, now who are those?" And St. Peter said, "Well, those are the Methodists. They've done it all." Amen. I can tell you. I just got back from Phoenix. I am a native Arizonan, but I'm not crazy. And I always feel like I have to say that because of the Midwesterners who came there and destroyed my state and turned it into a Christian fascist bastion, if I may borrow Rich's locution there. But I was down there to sell books, and that went well, and I came back with the ever-helpful airplane cold. So if I sniffle or cough a little bit tonight, it's not you, and I'm past the point of any infection, so fear not. And I'm glad some of you at least sat close, because I actually showered tonight just for you. We are going through extraordinary times. This is not a recovery like we have seen in any post-World War II era. Everything seems to be different, and much of it in a bad way. We've been through something that people have called the Great Recession, but we're actually going through a much larger and more profound series of changes. And I started calling this several years ago the Great Disruption. And writing about this for the newspaper in Phoenix was one of the things that got me not only run out of the town, but run out of the state. And so I came up here in the Witness Relocation Program. Let me mention some of the aspects of the Great Disruption, and then go a little more in depth on those before the time runs out. What I will tell you is that our future is one almost entirely based on discontinuity. The next 30 years are not going to be a repeat of the past 30 years. Most Americans cannot even begin to get their minds wrapped around this or what it will mean. What are some of the aspects of the Great Disruption? One is what we might call a high-cost energy future. or we might call it peak oil. Now, there is a quote that I'm fond of using that says peak oil is a fact of geology. Now, the person who said this was not the head of the Sierra Club or the Natural Resources Defense Council. The person who said that peak oil is a fact of geology is, and I will have to do violence to you if you don't mute all your phones, so please do that now. The person who said that peak oil is a fact of geology, a fact, was the CEO of Chevron. Now, peak oil does not mean we're running out of oil. What peak oil means is that we have used up half of this one-time gift of geology. And the rest of it is going to be much harder to get and much more costly to get. Our entire civilization is based on cheap oil. And it is based on oil that is light, sweet Texas crude, or West Texas Intermediate, or whatever you want to call it. It's very inexpensive to refine. Most of what's going to be left is heavier crudes with a lot of impurities, a lot of sulfur. They're going to cost a lot more to find and refine. Now, the oil industry knows this. This is one reason they're not investing in new refineries. And our political leaders know this. They won't tell us. George W. Bush talked more about peak oil than Barack Obama has. And so, faced with this reality, we're in this mad rush to find every hydrocarbon on the planet. We're fracking, we're using tar sands from Canada. Remember when we thought Canadians were those nice people from up north who had this kind of odd diction, eh? Now you can put an entire bumper sticker on the country that says, "We're changing the planet, ask us how." The New York Times and most of the mainstream media are either completely ignorant about energy issues or they are co-opted by the billions of dollars spent by the industry, or at least hundreds of millions spent by the industry to make you think, move along, nothing to see here. That talk about, we have a 100-year supply of natural gas, or so-and-so has made this vast offshore discovery. It's not going to help. It's not going to work. More and more of the developing world is using oil. They want to industrialize. They want what has become the American lifestyle of endless single occupancy, happy motoring. They're competing with us for this resource. Now, we know oil peaks exist because in 1971 or 2, the U.S. hit its peak. And from that point on, production went down. But you only know a peak in the rearview mirror. You don't know it when it's happening. But when you look at the actual production, we may well have hit peak in 2006, when the economy was booming and we were seeing oil-producing countries actually hold back oil for their domestic uses. And even the International Energy Agency and the Energy Department admit these things are true. Do not believe what you hear about reserves. Reserves are a state secret in Saudi Arabia for a reason, and that's because they don't want you to know how much oil they really have. Most of the elephant fields in the world are in decline. Cantarell in Mexico is certainly a big example of this. And the new discoveries are not making up for what has already been burned off and what is being burned right now. Fracking, hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling. I always loved that word when I was covering the oil industry. They provide new ways to get in and extract oil and gas. They are very costly, and they cause huge environmental damage as a result. We have things like tar sands and oil shale. Again, huge environmental consequences, but again, very expensive. And as George W. Bush said, most of the oil is in places where the people don't like us very much. Now, one of the consequences of this reality is that the era of happy motoring is over. We just don't know it. Now, reality doesn't really care what we think. It's just going to happen. And you can repeat this about everything I'm going to say here. Another one of the consequences of peak oil in a high-cost energy future is that you're going to see much more political instability. You see the tension in the Yellow or in the South China Sea because there is under the seabed a lot of potential oil reserves that are sought after by China and the Philippines and Vietnam, which is now our ally. Isn't it funny the way history goes in circles? We're going to see this all over the world. Now, even if you are an optimist and you say, well, we won't hit peak for another 10 years, or we won't hit peak until 2030, we're doing nothing as a society to make this transition. We had an opportunity during the Great Recession to really do a stimulus and really target it to do things like build high-speed rail, rebuild what was once the best passenger train system in the world in my lifetime, to retrofit suburbia with light rail and with abundant transit. We have done nothing. Now, aliens are not going to stop by and give us hydrogen cars. I hate to tell you. An electric car is not a power source. And as far as alternative energy goes, be skeptical. Because for most of alternative energy, the inputs required to make a unit of energy require more fossil fuels than the output that is produced. There's another thing the New York Times can't seem to wrap around its head. You know, these East Coast liberals that want to bring Islamo-fascist socialism to us, you know, they're like a mouthpiece for ExxonMobil. This is the Great Disruption. Now, even if we had all the oil we wanted and all the oil we're promised and a 100-year supply of natural gas, and at some point, if you want to know, I can tell you why that's, well, I can't say that word in church, but it is a falsehood. But even if we had all those things and we wanted to continue our quote-unquote lifestyle, remember Dick Cheney, former President Cheney said, the American lifestyle is non-negotiable. Well, reality is going to renegotiate it. But even if we could do all those things, there is the second aspect of the Great Disruption, and that is climate change. Now, no offense to Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma, James Inhofe, R. Exxon. Climate change is a fact. There is almost unanimous agreement among the scientists who really study it. And it is a fact that it is human caused, and it is getting worse, and it is getting worse at a much faster rate than we even expected. Now, in science, there's always disagreement over the details, how fast, how bad. That's the only place there's disagreement. In the pages of mainstream newspapers, they will talk about climate change deniers. I'm waiting for someone to start talking about round earth deniers. Now, again, the people in power know this is happening and that it's real. And I think that a lot of average Americans do too, but they think that climate change is going to be something that only hurts poor people in the third world. And I am here to tell you that that ain't so. Climate change is going to destroy huge numbers of species. You can say goodbye to the Sun Belt. It's going to cause huge geopolitical disruptions and confrontations. The United Nations said several years ago that water will be to the 21st century what oil was to the 20th century. Already down in Phoenix, when I left on Monday, it was 108 degrees. 108 degrees in May. It's only going to get worse. Tropical diseases will start migrating north. There will be huge dislocations of people who will come north and come here. And if they don't like brown people in the Southwest, just wait. Our task is to prevent climate refugees from the rest of America from coming here. So I always tell people that Seattle is as cold as the Arctic and it rains every single day. So don't move here. And please tell your friends, family, and anyone who asks the same thing. And also, Seattle people are very cold and chilly, and you won't make any friends. Climate change is going to produce economic costs far higher than the costs to address it. And we're rapidly reaching a turning point where it's baked in the cake. And this is going to be something that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will curse us for not addressing. The third major element of my old Great Disruption theory was called 3 billion new capitalists in the world. But it is much more complicated than that. Yes, we have billions of people who are developing their nations. They want American lifestyles. They want what we have. But we also have a situation where we have negotiated very bad trade deals. And so the consequences in this country have been horrific for the American middle class. And in many cases, they have been horrific for people in developing countries. Just ask the families of Foxconn workers who committed suicide. It's going to be a much more competitive world. We don't even have a manned space program anymore. All we can do is cut our schools. All we can do is cut funding for research and development and education. All we can do is fall into the part of the Great Disruption that I should have seen coming but didn't quite, and that is political extremism. Now, I'm from Arizona, and I grew up a Goldwater Republican. And before he died, Barry said, "I will be remembered as a liberal." And so I don't mean to offend any of you by saying this, but the reality is that one of our two great political parties has become captured by extremists. Now, this is unprecedented in our history. And I can't think of a time like this. I used to read about the 50s and Joe McCarthy and think it must have been an amazing time to live, and how could we do such a thing? But there were people like Dwight Eisenhower who were going to quietly do tail gunner Joe in. This is not like that time. And then I think about the 1850s and the eve of the Civil War, and this is much closer to that time. But our split is not just regional, it's within neighborhoods, it's within cities. And it is a split between the reality-based community and the people who simply don't want to face facts. Now, this is the point in the talk where people start planning their suicide options. And what I would say to you is that this is not a call for that. Americans have two mental gears, two emotional gears. One is wild optimism, and the other is suicidal depression. And we have to get some gears in between. This is a call to action. All of these problems can be addressed. Many of them can be fixed outright. But we're not doing anything about it. And the center of the country just keeps shifting ever more to the right, ever more to the control of the rich and the powerful, and people who believe there should be no social compact, people who believe that the commons are not worthwhile, that the country that I grew up in is some kind of myth, and that we need to somehow go back to the 1890s. The consequences of this are huge economically. The impact on the middle class has been felt for 30 years. The very rich are getting much richer. The people in the middle have seen their wages stagnate. These are all the economics of it, and we can talk about that, but that's not really the worst of it. Despite all the Christian-y-ness, as Stephen Colbert would say, of the loudest and the 50.1% that carry elections, we are committing heinous acts against the last and the least and the lost. I get emails from people who quote the Bible to me and say, well, Jesus said, the poor ye shall always have with you. And they do this as far as a long rambling email about how they earned what they got. And if people starve, too bad. If people don't have health care, too bad. You must permit me a little digression. You know, we're the only major advanced country in the world that doesn't have high-speed rail, doesn't have universal health care. We think we're advanced. We're stuck in 1970. But back to where I was with the poor you shall always have with you, they quote this, and I don't know what religious radio show or Rush Limbaugh, a obvious role model, or Fox quote-unquote news they get this from, but they don't seem to understand the context of this, that Jesus was talking to the disciples about they weren't always going to have him with them, so they really needed to pay attention. And then he goes on to give them a special mission to the poor, to the last, the least, the lost, the prisoner. We incarcerate more people than any country in the world, including Red China. And so just as I feel obliged to say I'm from Arizona, but I'm not crazy, I feel obliged to say I'm a Christian, but I'm not crazy. I'm not intolerant. I'm not a racist. I'm not a homophobe. And so the consequences for our morality as a people, for our souls, are a much higher price tag than the economics. And few people are talking about that. Few people are talking about the web of mutuality, as Martin Luther King Jr. called it, that binds all of us together. I live in Belltown. I go down 3rd Avenue. I'm surrounded by the homeless. Most of those people didn't grow up in a downtown, but we take them downtown because we're a public space, because the suburbs, the white right apartheid suburbs all over the country have zoned them out. And our nation says to them, too bad. And as Christians, we can't do that. And so we face difficult days ahead. But remember the scene in Terminator 2 where a very buff, if you'll forgive me for saying it in the parlor, Linda Hamilton, is using her K-bar combat knife to carve into the tabletop the words, "No fate." And her son explains to Governor Schwarzenegger that what she means is no fate but what we make. We can still turn this around, but we do not have endless second chances. And time is running out. We have to face reality. Reality doesn't care what we want. Reality doesn't care what we think. Reality is going to just keep hitting us upside the head, and the Great Recession is just the start. And with that, I'll thank you for learning to snooze with your eyes open attentively, and we'll break into pods. That sounds like something out of the movie Aliens. And then I'll be here. Thank you. May I just throw in a bit of shameless self-promotion before we start? You can read me Sundays in print in the Seattle Times and online, and then I blog every business day in the Seattle Times website. But you can also read my nasty stuff on my personal blog, which is called Rogue Columnist, and you can Google that. But it's www.roguecolumnist.com. And part of it is for the readers I left behind in Phoenix when I was thrown out. But the other part of it is on national issues, especially about sustainability and civic design and energy and things like that. So shameless self-promotion behind. If I'm in charge of taking your questions, then hands up. And if not, it's been a great evening. Good night. Okay, yes, sir. The question, as I understand it, is that we're not linking together the issue of climate change and overcapitalization. Okay, and the overfinancialization. Well, I think there are connections between the two. It is, you know, Seattle is this kind of island of prosperity and is not really like much of the rest of America, and it'll be the last to go down if that's of any comfort to you. And we do many things right and a few things wrong. But there are theorists who talk about the connection between peak oil and peak debt, about the notion that for instance, much of what you hear about with fracking and the 100-year supply of natural gas and things like that, it's really a land play. You know, Chesapeake Energy is not so much drilling oil wells as they're doing a real estate hustle with oil or with gas leases. And again, this is not well reported on. And so there's huge investment going on, debt-based investment in this natural gas play right now. And gas prices have fallen as a result, and so everybody's overextended. And this is what peak oil theorists talked about, is this constant overinvestment in legacy energy extraction, and then the bottom falls out, and then prices suddenly go back up, and then the bottom falls out. And you kind of run along this jigsaw line for a long time until the bottom falls out and doesn't come back. I don't know if that gets at some of what you were after. Kind of, I'll take as a, well, we have 7 billion people on the planet. We have too many people. We have 300 million people in this country. We have too many people. We are way overextended in a host of ways, and we are distended and malstended in so many ways that the average American family has seen its earnings stagnate and go down and its wealth go down as the rich have gotten richer, and so they've turned to debt and credit cards and things like that, and they're way over their heads. The average young person with a college degree, his or her earnings have grown only about 15% since 2000, and the student loan debt burden, just the average, has grown about 24%, if I recall. So this is going to be a very angry generation, and they're going to want to take away my Social Security, even though I didn't do it, but it's been done to them, and so yes, you're on to it. Yes, sir. Well, okay. I guess I was getting at the notion that there are a lot of people, and I know them, and they live in the gated properties. I'm not going to call them communities, and who do not and will not accept that we are at resource limits, and or that climate change is real and human caused. And these people vote, and a lot of other people don't. And Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously said, you are entitled to your own opinion, you are not entitled to your own facts. And thanks to the vast infrastructure on the right, they manufacture these quote-unquote facts that just aren't so. And it makes the debate even worse. I mean, I don't even know what a liberal is now. I think a liberal now is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan could not even win a GOP school board election now. The center has shifted so far to the right. But I hear what you're saying. I'm in Belltown, but other people are in their bunkers. My gas prices are cheaper. Question on this side? Yes, sir. Well, I don't really hear a question, but I agree with your statement. I think that the way that most of us have been living is going to become ever more difficult. And because we are pleasure-seeking mammals, and customs are very hard to change, habits are very hard to change, expectations are very hard to change, it's going to be a very rough ride. And to get at some of the energy issue things, can we have a sustainable energy system? Absolutely. And there's still going to be oil around and all that. It's just going to be very costly. Can we live the way we've been living, that more and more of us have been living for the past 50 years with vast sprawl suburbanization and endless single occupancy car driving? No. Sorry. I think it was Mondale who said this in 1984. They won't tell you, I will, but that is simply the reality. I also want to get at something underneath all these things, and that is that yes, we must pull together in community. We must reconstitute the commons, and we must gather back together our social safety net and our obligation to others. And history is an argument without end, but I will tell you that the America that was extant when I was a young man, for all of its flaws, was one that was based as much on mutuality as it was on rugged individualism. And it has always been so. And where we are headed today, and the, if you can call it that, intellectual underpinnings of this Ayn Rand world of law of the jungle and every person for him or herself. Notice my non-gender-based locution there, which is also much less poetic. That is national suicide, and that is what we're going to commit. Yes. Well, I mean, the question is that is there an environmental consciousness and ethic in the developing world? And the man with the dog's hat made the point that in China especially you have an authoritarian regime, and so what the average Chinese person wants is really irrelevant. But we didn't care about the environment when we were a developing country, but then the world had only 1 billion people. Now the planet is arguably at or near its carrying capacity. And I recommend to you a number of books by a writer named James Howard Kunstler. One, if you want to understand how much we've lost in good civic design, is called The Geography of Nowhere, and then Home from Nowhere. But the other book is called The Long Emergency, which gets into many of these topics. But the developing world, and this was one of the sticking points in the Kyoto Protocols, is that their view is, hey, you got yours, and now you're saying to us, we can't have ours. And we've been unable to come up with win-win solutions here. And another part of this is that American corporations, especially our oil companies, they want to prop up dictatorships. They want to go into into places like Nigeria and extract all the oil and let the people clean it up. But the enormous population and the enormous poverty, the desire for a better life. Again, we are pleasure-seeking mammals, all of us, most of us, maybe not a couple of my old girlfriends. But that is a very hard circle to square. It's not that it can't be done, and it's not that there aren't efforts to find these win-win solutions, but it's a huge problem. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that we couldn't do our part. I mean, we use more oil than any country. We could cut back our oil use. We pollute a bunch, not the way China does with coal, but we could rein that in. Something like 75% of greenhouse gases are emitted by cars. Well, especially down in the Sun Belt and in the drive to qualify areas, we need to have changes in land use and start to reconstitute real walkable neighborhoods and real communities where people can walk to local stores. That would also do a lot to rein in the obesity epidemic. In my case, it's just because, I'm crippled and fat and a pleasure-seeking mammal. But good point. Yes, sir. Well, and it's not even really rugged individualism, but the point in the question revolved around that it is a good thing that we have a small alternative progressive voice in things like Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! And The Nation and outlets like that. But he also voiced, and I think rightly, concern about how the majority of people get their quote-unquote news from either these media conglomerates that have to say, on the one hand, there might be climate change, but on the other hand, there are climate change deniers, or they get it from Fox News, which is just downright an outlet of the right wing with a political agenda. And all of us can do some things. I mean, for instance, I don't own a car. I take public transit. And this doesn't make me necessarily a moral giant. It's just that it's such a pain in the neck to drive. I'm so over that. I mean, I was over that after my Camaro when I was 28. Question in the back. Much of it, not in all cases, but, well, I mean, wind turbines. Wind turbines are made with fossil fuel inputs. And then you have to say, okay, how much energy do they produce for all the energy they require to be made? And this is not an anti-alternative energy or green technology screed. It is simply to say that we have to set aside our American faith in technology, that somehow technology will allow us to sustain the unsustainable. We need to make different arrangements. We need to reconstitute our great railroad network, for instance. We need to build high-speed trains, but just for the beginnings. I mean, the Cascades are wildly popular. We'll see if the next governor tries to defund that. Amtrak, wildly popular. Every year it has to fight for its life with Congress. Imagine if we had convenient trains all the time. I mean, that's just one simple way. Other measures of conservation, a carbon tax, a tax on sprawl living, and finding, and I hate to say this in Seattle, I might get run out of here too, but the NIMBYs have got to be willing to accept more density in their neighborhoods. I mean, Paris really sucks, doesn't it? Paris has really high density, and Paris is just an awful place to live. You can have high quality density. I agree. The question was, how do progressive Christians at least make a start to own some of these issues? And I think that our Lord and Savior commands us to do so. Partly we need to show up, and partly we need to not be so timorous about our faith and be willing to actually talk about it, and rather than being so politically correct all the time. I am happy to tell people that look, I was a paramedic for 5 years, nearly 5 years, and most of it was in the worst part of downtown Phoenix. And I was not only the first responder, but the primary caregiver to the homeless and the poorest people, and I hated them. I gave them good care, but I hated them. And a few years later, my minister suggested that for Lent that I do the one-a-day Bible thing. It sounds like a vitamin, but it's a Bible you can get where you read a part of it once a day for a year. And I did that. It was the first time I'd ever read the entire Bible through. Now anybody who comes up to me asking for money, I give it to them. It doesn't matter. The old me would have said, well, they're just going to buy drugs and they're going to buy booze. That's what I do. Now I don't care. I give them money. Because I have actually read Jesus' words and seen them in context, and it changed my life. And I think that we in the mainstream Protestant churches, the mainline Protestant churches, have for 40 years, kind of since we became the United Methodist Church, although nothing against the Brotherhood, we have just absented ourselves from the national dialogue. I mean, when Rick Warren is considered, kind of the moderate preacher out there, there's something wrong with that. And we need to be in that dialogue, and we need to be in that dialogue as Christians. The mainstream media calls the people evangelicals. Well, the Methodist Church is an evangelical church. What they're talking about is fundamentalists, which is a big difference. And we need to go back and take back that word. And we need to show by our actions and by our outreach that we're there for the conversation. And we also need to recognize that, yes, a ministry to the homeless is absolutely important, and Jesus called on us specifically to be his ministry to the poor, but I guarantee you that there are hurting souls on Mercer Island and in Medina, and sometimes it's as simple as find a hurt and heal it. But it's also as complex as we've got to show up, and we've got to show up and act as Christians in the public square. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. It was great. Well, I'm Jeff Riefman, and I'm one of Rich's co-organizers of Initiative 103, and I'm hoping by the end of hearing me talk, John will sign the petition to put it on the ballot. So we'll see. That'll be my test. One thing I wanted to tell you, have you heard of the Coal-Free Bellingham initiative going on? Show of hands, yes? So they announced today that there are 500 signatures from getting Prop 2 on the ballot, which would ban, it's great, if voters pass it in Bellingham, it would not only restrict them from operating the coal train, but it would also strip corporate constitutional rights of energy companies up there. So I want to talk about why I-103 matters. So, because people ask me this a lot, like, why does I-103 include so many things, and how would it affect us right away? And I've been kind of blown away by reading the news lately. So let me mention a few headlines that I've seen in the Seattle Times and on the website. Probably tomorrow you're going to wake up, you're going to see some pictures of Hammering Man down at the Seattle Art Museum with a balloon over its head that says, Amazon, respect your workers. And so today I was down at a rally that was put on by labor groups at the Amazon shareholder meeting. You'll probably read more about it tomorrow. And Amazon actually backed down. They're withdrawing their support from the right-wing group ALEC, and they're also going to air condition their factories. So it's a victory.
Read about it in my Seattle Times blog today.
It's online today. That's how I
need the page.
Yeah. So, and then today, I think, help me with this, but the Capitol Hill rezoning challenge was on the front page, right? So this is an issue, if you've heard about it. Mayor McGinn is proposing some rezoning up on Capitol Hill, partly density, but partly integration from retail. I'm not exactly sure of the details, but the Capitol Hill Community Council is against it. So it's this issue of neighborhoods having a say in what's happening. I'm not passing judgment on, the mayor's plan or the community's plan, but okay, we'll let you do that in a minute. Then there's been some. Tomorrow you're probably also going to read about the Department of Justice secret letters confidentially have come out and said that the DOJ is telling the mayor that he needs to get with the program. Basically, the mayor's plan to address the problems that we have with our police are just not meeting the seriousness of the issues that the DOJ has presented. Another thing that you've been reading about in the paper is the NBA arena deal, right? So we have this situation where the mayor has worked out this plan in private with a hedge fund investor, Chris Hansen, to put $200 million of city money towards an NBA arena, while you may have also read that the mayor doesn't want to spend $41 million in the first year to actually give us a police force that is treating its citizens respectfully and accountably. You might have read about the coal train that has to get to Bellingham has to go through Ballard. And King 5 had some great video where they walked along the tracks and they found all this coal. And this is just from a tiny number of coal trains that actually go through our region today. It's a dramatic, the plan is to have 18 1-mile long coal trains coming through Seattle up to Bellingham. So it's a dramatic spike in traffic, and we would have coal all along these tracks because these cars run open. 18 per day, yeah. 9 full of coal, 9 returning empty is my understanding, although I'm still catching up, so I might be a little wrong on that. Another story that you probably read about in the last couple days is this one, just bizarre. It's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is attacking the Seattle School Board's management practices. Now, I don't quite understand what's going on, but I have a lot of friends from Microsoft, and I from the Kool-Aid that they're drinking is that schools need to be privatized, that we need charter schools. And it's because the public school system is not working, which, hey, I'll buy that argument. That's pretty clear, right? It's just the conclusion that they've come up with is that we need to fund these things privately. You mentioned your ex-girlfriend, so I'll mention one of mine. One of my ex-girlfriends, or I don't know, that might be an overstatement. She is running the campaign to, they just announced an initiative campaign to, you could say that we were better matched than I ever realized because we're both running initiative campaigns. But they need to get 125,000 signatures to get on the state ballot in 6 weeks. So this is a charter school initiative that is being brought back up again. And it's funded in large part, at least her group in the past was funded by Connie Baumer, wife of Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer. So there's something going on with the US Chamber of Commerce attacking the public schools here and rich tech billionaires and their families funding initiatives to privatize the school system. And so there's something going on there. So how does this all tie into Initiative 103? Well, Initiative 103 it restricts lobbying to public forums. So what that means is that this NBA deal between Chris Hansen and the mayor would not have ever been started to be hatched in private and dropped on the public unsuspectingly. It would have started in public view. Chris Hansen would have had to come to a public forum and say, hey, I have this idea, I have this money, I would like to build an NBA arena. I think that all this private influence over the school system that we're seeing and any lobbying that is taking place, that also kind of falls under this. When it comes to the police reforms that we're talking about, I-103 provides citizens like you and me a right to oversight and citizen oversight of the police. It moves the Office of Professional Accountability, which currently reports to the police chief, outside of the police department to report to the mayor. Did you have a question there? Okay. Sure, okay. I-103 provides rights for workers. It guarantees constitutional rights in the workplace. So when we look at what's happening in Amazon with people afraid to speak out, when we look at people afraid to organize, I-103 also provides rights to collective bargaining for workers in Seattle. Again, it's everything that we're reading about in the news, I-103 is speaking to. I-103 speaks to neighborhood approval of changes in zoning. What it's trying to give is that the communities around these zoning changes that are driven by commercial interests, not public interest, like if it's a governmental project, but commercial interests, need to have 50.1% approval. And if you can't sell your project to 50% of the people living in a community, should you be able to just go ahead with that project? I think that's a debate that we can have. When it comes to the coal train, the Seattle City Council is going to talk about this on Tuesday. If any of you are interested in testifying at the hearing, it's at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. The Seattle Council is going to pass a non-binding resolution, most likely, saying that we shouldn't have the coal train. But they don't have any laws that can actually stop the coal train. And so I-103 provides rights for nature, which gives the city of Seattle, or any resident in Seattle, the right to go to court and stop a project that clearly its negative impacts on the environment, both locally when it comes to diesel pollution and asthma, or coal dust, or coal remnants, or globally with climate change, can't be mitigated. Tim Eyman announced over $250,000 in donations from BP and Conoco to pay signature gatherers for I-1185. It's not exactly clear, but I-103 prevents corporations spending money on campaigns, and it's likely that he would not be able to pay signature gatherers in the city of Seattle. And if you take the city of Seattle out of Tim Eyman's signature gathering efforts, it would really hurt him. Do I need to wrap up really quick? Yeah, sorry. Got to stand closer, Rich. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you, these are some of the ways that I-103 touches the issues that are in the news, that are impacting us, and why it matters. So what I'd like to do just is ask you, take home a blank petition, bring it back next week, filled with some of your friends' signatures. Consider getting involved, volunteering with us to gather signatures to get it on the ballot. And thank you for your time. We're not really releasing that. We're just still ramping up, but we are trying to get as many people out there because we need 28,000 signatures by July 5th to be really sure that we qualify for the November ballot. But we have longer if we want to qualify for next year's ballot, but we're really emphasizing qualifying for the November ballot right now.